Meta.
I want to shift gears and talk about the UAP issue. We have you on one end of the spectrum who is not afraid to speak up, who is not afraid to go against the stigma or whatever. And then you've got Neil deGrasse Tyson, who constantly seems to laugh off UFOs, UAP. Why do you think that there are so many scientists such as Neil deGrasse Tyson and others that laugh off or downplay, or in my opinion, what they do sort of continues the stigma, and they downplay the possibility that UAP exists and could represent some form of of non-human intelligence? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, first, I would like to explain that Neil deGrasse Tyson is a popularizer of science. He's not a practicing scientist. Over the past decade or two, he didn't write scientific papers. He wrote books that talk about, what other scientists discovered. It's very different, if you're a soccer player or a critic that sits in the audience and looks at what is happening on the field, And I published over the past month alone about 10 scientific papers. And I'm in the trenches doing science. So my point is that it's not so much about what he says versus what I say. It's about whether you are actually practicing the science or you're talking about it, because you are not in a position to protect science if you are not practicing it. Okay. And in fact, there are YouTubers and bloggers that criticize what I do. And how dare they? Let me ask it this way, because if they were to actually do the science, these are mainly dropouts from academia, people who didn't get an academic position, and somehow they have, some number of likes on social media or some views on YouTube, but they don't have the credentials to represent science. They're not doing science. Okay, so it's as if a movie critic would argue that a movie director should not be doing what they're doing. Like, who gave you that privilege? You don't know what it's like to actually make a movie, and in this case, to actually do the work of science, because you're not practicing it. You didn't get a position that allows you to practice it, and now from the sidelines, you are arguing that whoever has that privilege should not do what they're doing. Like, this sounds ridiculous to me. Now, the other reason it doesn't make a lot of sense is because the public cares a lot about this subject, and science is supported by the public. Okay, and so for scientists to stay in an ivory tower and argue, we know better. We don't listen to what the public really wants. We know that we want to figure out more details about microbes that might exist elsewhere. We will never look into the possibility of extraterrestrial intelligence just because we think the prospects of finding it are small. Now, once again, if the mainstream was actually right in all of its assertions over the past few decades, I would say, okay, give them the benefit of the doubt. But when I look at my field, when I started astrophysics, it was the folklore that the dark matter, 85% of the matter in the universe, we don't know what it is. And it was popular to argue that these are the lightest supersymmetric particle. In other words, let's imagine a new symmetry of nature called supersymmetry. Everyone said it's natural, we should believe it. And then the Large Hadron Collider was funded at $10 billion to search for it and didn't find it in the natural range of parameters. So here's an example where the mainstream was, not only quite confident that it exists, but, people were giving awards to others for ideas related to supersymmetry. The dark matter was thought to be related to supersymmetry. We didn't find it. So the thing about it is science is a learning experience, and very often the mainstream takes the wrong path. But if you heard basically argue that nobody should deviate from that path, then everyone would go along this path and not find anything. And that happens again and again. And on the other hand, if you allowed diversity of ideas and then explore other paths on questions that matter to the public, I'm not saying things that are completely hypothetical. I mean, we exist. We know that we exist on a planet near the sun. There are billions of similar systems in the Milky Way galaxy. And why should it be considered highly speculative that something like us emerged, even billions of years ago, around other stars. That seems to me like common sense. And for that to be ridiculed, by people who do not practice science is completely inappropriate. And my point is, we should invest similar funds and effort in the research of trying to find evidence for intelligence. I know it for a fact that it would bring young kids to science, that it would bring funding from wealthy individuals. In fact, I was speaking just a few hours ago with them, and they were extremely excited. All of my research over the past decade is funded by donors, not by federal funding agencies. And there is a huge amount of wealth that can be tapped for the benefit of science, which is not being tapped because the academic community is so hostile to what the public cares about. And so I would say what Neil deGrasse Tyson is doing is basically trying to be popular, okay? And in order to be popular within the scientific community or within the cohort of people that are in this echo chamber, he needs to repeat whatever is being said by others. And that is, that may give him more likes, but it's actually not the smart thing to do, because sometimes, especially when dealing with phase transformations, like a change in the paradigm, you have to get used to something completely new and imagine something. Like, nobody expected quantum mechanics. I bet you that if Neil deGrasse Tyson existed a century ago and quantum mechanics, people were starting to discuss quantum mechanics, he would say, that's crazy. Like, how can reality behave in this way? What are you talking about? And if there was no research going in that direction, obviously it would be a self-fulfilling prophecy. Everyone would say classical physics is everything. Like Michelson, a very famous physicist, said, close to the end of the 19th century, said there is nothing else to discover. We will just figure out things to the 6th decimal point. That was his speech when a new laboratory at the University of Chicago was inaugurated. And how short-sighted that physicist was. And he was a practicing experimentalist. And because, just a decade later, special relativity was found. And 2 decades later, general relativity, a theory of gravity. And 3 decades later, quantum mechanics was discovered. So the guy thought that it's the end of physics and everything was. And so for Neil deGrasse Tyson to say, oh, this is ridiculous, that shows, a reluctance to learn something new. And, on a subject that the public is fascinated by. And the way I see it is simply as a missed opportunity for humanity if we will not invest significant funds in this frontier. And of course, in a decade, if funds are invested and we find something, everyone would say, including Neil deGrasse Tyson, of course, we all anticipated that. Check all these science fiction movies. I even said that it's quite likely that there might be life like us somewhere else. Like, they would completely change their because in order to be liked 10 years from now, it would appear that you need to advocate for it.